Today's discussion was about reflecting on the identity and global and local issues. Among the group, the discussion was so much around how difficult is that interaction, how multifaceted is it, and there is a general consensus on the fact that there is no recipe, it's not that easy, but one thing is sure, that it is happening and it's inevitable. So I think it's a very good thing that there's consensus. There is not only one identity, even within one community, that it's multi-layered, different from even in the time. It's changing within one individual. And then from that discussion comes out of what is then the role of the discussion of the cultural policy. What is the role of the cultural policy toward this shifting, these transformations, that is changing and building of identities and rebuilding the global and the local also and the interaction. And from that discussion, it becomes very important to be aware that there is a need for minimum of organization at local level and also global level about more creating the environment that enable that process to happen in the most, let's say, positive environment, that the final aim should be to give the opportunity for those different identities to evolve, be visible, express in an equal manner. So that was a very important discussion, and it comes too much around the cultural policy, and also from that comes also where we position ourselves. People come from different regions, and especially the South, there is a lot of shift of relationship, of power, of visibility at global level. There's new hotspots, and they are from South countries, and then where we position ourselves, these new actors, how we pursue each other, how we're gonna work together. So that also comes, and there is maybe, I hope during these days, that there's something become very concrete action, like, okay, what we can do together toward that. So I'm very optimistic, I'm very happy that this discussion came out.
We started to kind of provoke each other a little bit, and we explored different questions of identity from a kind of much more geographical and political and kind of societal sense, and then kind of drilled down into the cultural identities that we experience and live within. We talked a lot about space and how cultural identities are somehow bound up in institutions, national institutions, and kind of the traditional canon of how good art is seen and in the right way. And I think we had a few members of our group, myself included, who think that paradigm is shifting, and almost there's a lot of work and writing at the moment around the provocation that the institution is dead, or the institution has become irrelevant. And I think that's definitely the case in my experience in the UK, in the way that the funding structures are more bound up in an earlier time where building infrastructure and buildings and investing in large-scale, nationally representative organisations of art forms is the kind of still the way, but shifting and changing. So the shift into online kind of abilities for distribution and production, and the kind of proliferation of technology that we're all experiencing, we think is really changing that dynamic. We talked a lot about ownership as well, and ownership of culture, and who defines kind of what that canon is and what that kind of national cultural identity becomes. So there were examples from different countries around the world whose cultural heritage is almost being reappropriated and owned by the state, and it's not necessarily the state's to own or exploit or capitalise. It's of the community, and surely the question should come into this, whether the community want to advertise and kind of capitalise their perhaps fairly sacred kind of cultural history and cultural life. We talked then about the information age and the technology age, so the shift from things like analog TV and radio into digital TV and radio, freeing up a large section of the radio spectrum, which is then in turn being somehow claimed, without much publicity, claimed by states as being owned by them, and then sold to mobile phone networks and internet providers and things like that. But is this not a public resource? So the ownership and kind of shift and change in how the conversation is had around around cultural history and cultural assets, I guess, was quite an interesting area. We also talked about, I was quite provocative in the sense of saying, do people ever exploit cultural identities that they work with or work in for kind of structural use in terms of funding? Maybe it's a kind of a current thing for the funding structures to be interested in a particular social demographic that maybe isn't particularly interested in telling the world about its story, but maybe the world wants to hear it, or the funding world wants to hear it. And I think people kind of admitted that you know, that sometimes is the case, but as long as there's an integrity and a good that can be found in reappropriating programs and reappropriating work to reach to align with what you're already trying to achieve, then that can only be a positive thing. And then moving on to the kind of institution being a dead space or a kind of dead paradigm, we talked a lot about, I think, or we started to go towards the live experience. So it's a huge conversation and a huge interest of mine as well. The live experience versus the online or the streamed or the recorded, in your bedroom, TED Talk kind of culture. And maybe the institution is more under the pressure to evolve and to innovate and to change. So I think that's, in terms of change management, which I know we'll get onto tomorrow, I think we flirted around the issues of actually employing innovation and change within institutions is a perhaps more fundamental problem for us than within our individual organisations or within our art forms or the way that we work with technology and with communities. Because the institution somebody described it, Seb described it as the roads. You know, if the roads are publicly owned and distributed kind of widely across the country, that's good because you can travel everywhere, but you can't control the tolls and you can't control what sort of vehicles are allowed on it. And maybe kind of technology is enabling us to build our own roads kind of for free.
Some of the tensions that were discussed between local and global in South Africa. One of our group participants works in Cape Town for a network of artists across the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. And she said that, you know, the irony in Cape Town is that it's one of the most diverse cities in the world. It just hosted the World Cup in 2010. The atmosphere during that was amazing. But actually xenophobia and all forms of discrimination are still rife. In the same way, her network is being invited to global conferences in the rest of the world. The artists she works with are being asked to present their work across the countries, but very practical barriers like visa applications and the ability to actually move across countries and across continents stops them from taking part in other countries' exhibitions and so on. So again, the irony is that at a local level, these artists are being asked to be part of a global artistic network, but actually that's not so easy because politics and economics a lot of the time stands in the way. We had a good debate about space makers and space managers. So Serhal had brought up one of the plenary discussions this morning, the idea of arts managers as space managers. And our group responded to whether they felt like they were space managers or not. A lot of us found the idea of space really useful because it could be online, it could be outside a public space, and it could be an institutional space. And all of those can be occupied by artists to express, things in them. There was a feeling in the group that the digital is a bit out of reach. It hasn't come up properly yet. Like, we're still grappling with what the online space means in the context of all of this. But there was a good discussion about the value of public space and physical spaces where you can gather people together. And projects like free Wi-Fi in downtown Mexico City, reanimating public spaces and making them accessible to all. And rebalancing some of the inequalities around access to the online space. So, it takes only a Wi-Fi connection, but that Wi-Fi connection costs money, and, there are various barriers to accessing it. Michael came to talk to us about Detroit, and he was talking about community organizing and how Detroit is really the home of community organisation in the States. And in terms of reaching out to local communities and engaging them, which he described as engaging them means going and sitting and sitting and sitting and listening and listening and listening, and then working together, not reaching out and trying to bend people round to your way of doing stuff. So saying, well, I think you should really like my radio station or my opera because, instead reversing that, and that process took a long time and took serious investment and commitment, was not something that you could just fly in to a local place and make it global.
That is an important point, which is our role as cultural heritage leaders, and how can we take forward all these considerations in our daily responsibilities, and making the best out of our team, out of our organization, and how to sustain the level of the quality of our organization and of our works. And I think this is how the cultural fluency comes to integrate with our policy and strategy, how to make it that efficient within our teams and within our organizations. This is something that we learned about today, and it was very nice to hear it and to hear different points and different views from all over the world, actually. And this cultural fluency do really integrate with our society first and with us as specialists in the field. So we need to integrate that with our educational systems in relation to art and cultural heritage. We need to integrate that to different levels of the society. So we do have cultural perspectives at different levels. So we need to consider the culture itself and the subcultural levels as well. So this system of making our strategy more flexible, making it absorbing different opinions, different levels of normal behaviors and abnormal behaviors, as they all belong to our culture, they all belong to our identity. And this is where we spoke again, we discussed the idea of identifying our identity. Is it something that belongs only to ourselves, or does it belong to our country, our nation, or the time that we lived in? So this is where the definition of identity, of cultural heritage identity, really varies, and it should be considered as a wide topic and not very small, targeted, and not open-minded topic. And we all agreed that this identity comes to us in terms of where we were born, where we had lived, what culture we were exposed to at the time of our living time or life cycle. So whether that was in our country, in our family, in our schools, in our education, or our working experiences, all of these factors do influence our identity and become part of it. But at the same time, if we are traveling abroad, what would the influences of other cultures participate in building our own identity? They do all contribute to that, and we need to appreciate it. We need to consider it as a positive addition to our identity, and not only just consider it something totally different, something I would not accept. Because we all, as human beings, do share many things, but at the same time do have a lot of dissimilarities, but we need to respect them. Because if we think of us as only as passengers coming to this life, coming to this world, and just absorbing things from this nation, this culture, and this experience, then we need to participate and to interact with that in a positive way, let us say. Just take what you think that is suitable for your identity, for your culture, for your own thoughts, but at the same time try to leave some beautiful impact on the other nations, and probably they would love to be part of your cultural identity at the other end.